Welcome to Coachable Wealth, where we blend the worlds of sports and finance to bring you strategies as you navigate your wealth building journey. John, Cody, and Sean are here to help you elevate your financial advisor relationship to meet your long-term goals. Now let's get to it.
All right, so we are getting down to the final days of college basketball. We had the women's final championship over the weekend, and then we have the men's tonight.
I watched both the men's game and looking forward to the national championship tonight versus UConn and Purdue. And I will say, this is the most I've ever watched women's college basketball. I almost think I was more engaged and looking forward to the women's games than I am the men.
Yep.
Friday night's Final Four. I mean, that game, that was just a great game.
Between UConn and Iowa.
Yeah.
Great that was a really good game. I think this is honestly, this year is the first time I've ever watched women's basketball.
I saw the women's Final Four. Ticket prices were more expensive for the women versus the men. And then the women also had a larger TV audience than the men did too. I saw those stats come across.
Yeah, I saw the TV numbers. I did not know about the ticket prices. Is that because I assume they're playing in a much smaller stadium than the men's? I mean, the Final Four was in Phoenix. I think they said it held 64,000 people.
Yeah.
I assume the women's are a lot smaller.
I think that is the main reason. They played where the Cleveland Cavaliers play. So maybe 20,000 that fits.
Yeah.
And then you're right. The men played where the Arizona Cardinals played, and it fit like 60, 70,000.
I mean, it's still crazy though. I assume this is the first time ever that women's tickets are more than men's.
Yeah.
Sean, how was your weekend? I know you went on a team trip for football.
Yeah, so it was cool. I was the school I coached for had some connections to the University of Buffalo and the Buffalo Bills, so I got to spend a good amount of time inside all the facilities at the University of Buffalo, watching spring practice, picking the coaches' brains, going over schemes, sitting in on their team meetings, which was just super interesting. It's always nice to see what the next level is doing. And even though University of Buffalo is kind of a smaller Division I school, the coaching staff, I mean, the head coach was the special teams coordinator in the SEC, and the OC was an offensive coordinator in the ACC. So it was pretty cool to see that and just be around football for a weekend, which is always nice. And then also got to spend a little bit of time with a few members of the Buffalo Bills staff, which was really, really cool and really interesting. Unfortunately, we didn't get to go to their facilities. They actually snuck out sort of to come to our Airbnb because the media frenzy over the Stephon Diggs trade, I guess, was a little nuts. So they kind of reached out and said, hey, there's more news people here than we like, so we're just going to come to you guys.
Wow. That's awesome, though.
Yeah, really just down-to-earth, normal, humble people just sit and talk football for hours.
When's their official spring game? Do you know, for Buffalo, University of Buffalo?
I think it's 2 weeks. They had a scrimmage on Saturday, like a very controlled scrimmage, kind of working specific situations, not just a full-on game.
Yep.
But I believe it's in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And they did have an indoor practice facility, which was much needed because it snowed all weekend.
John, do you know when Penn State's blue and white game is? Their spring game?
Yep, it's this upcoming Saturday, the 13th.
Oh, are you going to it?
No, I haven't been out in 5+ years. It's fun to go out. You can tailgate. Believe it or not, for a glorified scrimmage, you get a nice Saturday. They get 60, 70,000 people show up for that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, it's just a reason to, I guess, tailgate and watch football in spring.
Yeah. We have the championship tonight. Do you guys have interest in the game? Are you rooting for a specific team?
I would love to see UConn go back-to-back. I really wanted NC State to pull through, but I don't think any of my NCAA tournament predictions have panned out over the last couple of weeks. So I'll root for UConn, but I'll tell you what, I was definitely, like John said, much more interested in the game yesterday. I was really hoping to see Caitlin Clark win a national title.
Yeah. I unfortunately didn't get to watch a ton of it yesterday because I was pretty much doing yard work all day, but I was also happy for South Carolina. Their head coach is from Philadelphia, so it was a good game. And when was the last time? I assume there was a time before the women's basketball team went undefeated. Maybe UConn back in the day.
Yeah, I want to say UConn did it in like 2015, 2014 or something like that, when they were on that incredible run when they won 4 in a row or something like that.
Speaking of that, I know there was a lot of stuff over the last week about Caitlin Clark. Some people are saying she's not the best of all time if she does not win the national championship, which she did not do this year. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Of being the goat, the greatest of all time, that you have to win a national championship?
I think typically you have to win a national championship to be in that category. But we're also talking about, I think, a little bit of a different sport. I mean, say you think of, I don't know, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, the NBA. They won how many like championships, and that kind of puts them in a whole different category. But I think just brought women's basketball, college basketball, to a whole nother
Yep.
level. They were saying just the amount of children, and I think anybody, just how engaged they got into the sport. TV ratings showed it. I think, what was it, Friday night? That was like the most watched college basketball game or basketball game ever. I think they said like
Oh, really?
something like that. Yeah, the
I
numbers
mean,
were.
I know the ratings numbers were better than any NBA championship and better than any World Series games. It was better than, I think, every single bowl game besides one. I forget which bowl game it was, but yeah, obviously their ratings were well above everything else,
Yeah, I
which
mean,
is
just
crazy for women's basketball.
yeah. I was just thinking, Tor. I mean, minus the national championship that she doesn't have. I mean, just the eyeballs that she drew to the game, the sponsorships. I think Iowa sold out almost every home game.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I think that's a huge testament to her too.
yeah. Like I said, I don't watch women's basketball, so I can't really say who I think is the greatest of all time. But just as you were saying, John, the coverage that she's brought to women's basketball, and obviously she has the most points ever. I think she's up there in assists too. You can definitely make the argument that she is.
And just thinking about some players that have never won a championship, you're looking obviously different sports, but Randy Moss, Barry Sanders, Dan Marino. I mean, those three could easily be argued that those are the best three at their position of all time.
Yep.
You can get Allen Iverson. I mean, he's got to be in the conversation at some point, but never winning a championship in the NBA. They definitely all impacted the game one way or another. Like you said, Caitlin Clark got me watching, and how many others watching college basketball this past season.
Speaking of college basketball, there was a big headline that came out last night that John Calipari is leaving Kentucky and going to Arkansas.
Very interesting development. I really can't wrap my head around why, but I guess it's just the expectations and pressure that Kentucky has as a program.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say too that now I don't think this matters anymore with the NIL and the state of college sports, but I mean, John Calipari used to be a guy who would leave a university, and then not too far after he left, there'd be some recruiting violations that came out, and the school would be put on some sort of probationary period. I agree with John. It has to be the pressure, and I don't know if the details of the contract came out. Did they, John?
I
A
didn't.
little bit. So I think he's actually making a little less than he did at Kentucky, but he has some incentives that could make him make more money. So I think it really is just getting a fresh restart. The expectations of Kentucky are to win the national championship pretty much every single year. They've struggled over the last year, so I think it was probably a good restart for both Kentucky and also John Calipari moving to Arkansas.
A lot of people don't think about, they just think about sports. They don't think about the life change and the family change. Going from Kentucky to Arkansas is a pretty big difference in living style, I'm sure, based on geographics and things like that. So interesting.
We were talking a little bit about the potential buyout. I'm not sure the exact number, but I'm guessing it's pretty significant to get him to leave Kentucky and go to Arkansas. I don't know what the exact number is, but I was listening to a little bit of sports talk radio on my drive in to work this morning, and they were talking about Arkansas in general. You just think of Arkansas as just your normal school, but then they start talking about some of their major alumni base. I mean, Jerry Jones, they mentioned, the Walmart family, Tyson Food family. So, I mean, they got some pretty significant donors on board there. So, I mean, I don't know how it comes into play with any of these contract buyout details, but
They definitely don't have any shortage
yeah,
of money.
right. That was kind of a shock to me when I started hearing these names that are involved in the university.
I honestly had no idea that they had that much backing. But I mean, that obviously gives them a ton of resources for NIL to get top recruits. So
Right.
We had some big numbers last week with the payroll numbers. I know they were well above the expectations. We added over 300,000 jobs for the month. I think the expectations were only around 200,000. So a huge bump there. We have some important inflation numbers this week with the CPI and PPI coming out.
The job number, it was kind of unexpected. Everyone was a little subdued going into that, but obviously when it came out on, was it Friday it came out? I mean, huge number.
Yeah, after that, there was a lot of talk of, okay, if the economy's still doing that well, are they going to cut interest rates as soon as they thought they were going to? I saw on CNBC this morning that I think before Friday, the expectations for a rate cut in June was around like 60%. And then with that job number, I think it dropped all the way down to 35% chance that they cut in June. And for July, I think it was at almost 90% chance that they were going to cut before that jobs number. And now it dropped to 60%. So it'll be interesting going forward to see how the economy continues to do going forward.
Just one of the granular detail that I heard from the jobs report, like you can kind of go really dig deep
Yep.
into it to see where all the different details are of kind of what's going on. And they stated that this is the first time, and it's been a trend going forward here for the last couple of years, that self-employment is catching up to W-2 employment. There's,
Oh, really?
they said in like, I think they said in the next 5 to 7 years is going to be like the crossover point. There's going to be almost more self-employed individuals than there are W-2 workers,
Wow.
which I think that could be potentially a big problem for corporations who are looking to fill some of these jobs, but that just caught my eye.
No, that's really interesting.
Like John, completely surprised by the jobs report. That was kind of a not expecting that. As far as interest rates, it seems like every time the Fed kind of opens their mouth and says something else will happen and it gets just completely pushed down the road. They just keep kicking the can down the road of interest rates. And it just came out, what maybe less than a month ago that they're going to lower interest rates 3 times this year. Well, if the percentage of that happening in June and July is getting extremely low, are you going to have 3 rate cuts in the last quarter of the year? I don't know if that's ever happened in the same quarter, because then you're really just putting a lot of pressure on the market to handle those rate cuts in a short amount of time. So it'll be interesting to see if those 3 rate cuts really leak into next year at all at some point.
I agree. And I think one thing to point out is with the interest rates, so the Fed can control the very short term. That's the Fed funds rate. That's what's at 5.25% now. They do not control what the 2-year Treasury is doing, 5-year Treasury is doing, 10-year Treasury. That's controlled by interest on the bond market. So we started this year, the 10-year Treasury was yielding around 3.8. Now that's gone back up to 4.4%. Even with the 10-year Treasury raised going up around 0.6%, fixed income is pretty flat on the year. So the yield that you're getting on fixed income has been able to keep up with any principal loss. So it's still a good investment environment for fixed income.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's still an interesting time to buy a home around here because interest rates are going up, and or at least not, or they've gone up and haven't come down, and house prices are still going up.
Interest rates are still kind of in the 5% range. Inflation still higher than normal.
Yep.
But like they said, TSA, the air traffic numbers are still through the roof. I mean, people are traveling. Higher interest rates, people are still renovating their homes. I think the other thing I saw is the price of cocoa beans, chocolate. People are
Yeah.
going out and just eating chocolate like no other. What was the other one? Ferrari. I think they're at like an all-time high of like car orders or something like that. But I don't know. It's hard to argue with just those higher interest rates and inflation being a little above normal that the economy's not strong.
Yeah. It's good to see the economy strong even when the interest rates are higher than where a lot
Yeah.
of people would like them. But with higher interest rate, it gives investors a different area to try to get some return where pretty much the last 15 years, if you wanted a decent return, you had to be in majority stocks. Now, depending on your risk tolerance, and if you don't want to have a ton of stocks, you can allocate a little more to fixed income and pick up some good yield, which we haven't had in a long time. It's important to work with an advisor, to work with a CFP, and make sure that your overall allocation makes sense. And if you haven't done any rebalancing, now may be a good time if you want to take some risk off the table.
With higher rates, I mean, I guess if you're heading into your retirement years and you need to rely on your portfolio for income, I'm guessing now is a pretty good environment for that.
Yeah, you can get a decent yield on intermediate term corporates, short term corporates, international bonds, municipal bonds if you're in a high tax bracket. There's a lot of areas where you can get some good yield going forward. The championship game is tonight for men's basketball. Thoughts? Who do you think is going to win?
I want to see Purdue. I just want to see the Big Ten finally win one, but I'm going to go with UConn. I just don't see UConn losing.
I agree, John. I kind of want to root for Purdue, but I think they're going to have a tough time slowing down UConn. And UConn does have a big center that could potentially guard Edie. I think their center is like 7'2". I know Edie's like 7'4". So obviously he's still shorter and smaller than Edie, but they could potentially slow him down. And then, I mean, I know Purdue obviously has players outside of him, but he's the majority of the team, where UConn, I mean, any player could pretty much go off for them.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd like to see UConn win. But again, I haven't picked one right teams on this podcast yet. So
I don't think any of us had. I know I had Houston winning it all. Who did you guys have winning it all again?
I had North Carolina. They got knocked out in the Sweet 16.
I think I had Houston in our bracket here as well.
Yeah, so we're definitely not doing the best on our basketball picks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Coachable Wealth, brought to you by Morton Brown Family Wealth, an SEC-registered investment advisor. This podcast is designed for educational and informational purposes and not intended as investment advice. More information can be found at www.mortonbrownfw.com.